the heavy parchment of the divorce papers slapped against the mahogany dining table. Marcus adjusted his silk tie, his reflection catching in the dark window of the penthouse dining room. He looked down at the woman sitting across from him, his lip curling into a practiced sneer. "Sign it, Evelyn." The roasted chicken on her plate had turned cold and stiff. She stared at the bold letters at the top of the document, her fingers gripping the edge of the table until the dark skin across her knuckles stretched tight and ashen. He tossed a gold pen onto the stack of papers, the metal clinking sharply against the silence. She didn't move. "You have been nothing but an overpriced maid for the last 11 years. He paced around the heavy oak chairs, his custom leather shoes clicking rhythmically against the imported marble floor. The collar of her faded cotton blouse felt tight against her neck, while his words filled the massive room. He stopped pacing. "A leech draining my resources while I built an empire." Evelyn shifted her weight, the cardboard insert inside her worn left shoe pressing uncomfortably into her heel. She kept her eyes fixed on the cold meat, breathing slowly through her nose to steady the rising tremor in her chest. The pen waited. "Do not think about fighting this in court." Marcus leaned over the table, pressing his palms flat against the wood as he invaded her space. His breath smelled of expensive scotch and mint, masking the venom in his carefully calculated tone. "My financials are spotless." He picked up his crystal glass and took a slow, deliberate sip. "According to the official corporate ledgers, my holding company is currently operating at a massive loss." The corners of his mouth twitched upward in a predatory smirk as he set the glass down. "I am legally bankrupt." Evelyn finally raised her head, looking past the expensive suit and straight into his hollow eyes. She remembered the endless nights she had spent drafting his initial business proposals, the 47 pitch decks she had rewritten for him. Now, she was staring at a stranger who was effectively erasing her existence with a few forged documents. He crossed his arms. "If you try to claim alimony, the judge will see a man drowning in debt." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a harsh, grating whisper that echoed off the high ceiling. "You will be thrown out of this penthouse with exactly $3.17 to your name." She took the pen. The gold cylinder felt heavy and cold against her calloused fingertips. She slowly dragged the tip across the signature line, the blue ink staining the crisp white paper. Marcus let out a sharp breath of satisfaction, snatching the document away before the ink could completely dry. Evelyn stood up. The heavy mahogany door clicked shut behind her, severing her from the life she had built. The strap of her faded canvas duffel bag dug into her collarbone, its frayed edges a testament to the 11 years she had carried it. Rainwater pooled in the uneven concrete of the sidewalk, soaking through the thin cardboard insert pressed inside her right shoe. She kept walking. Streetlights flickered overhead, casting long, distorted shadows against the brick walls of the financial district. The sharp wind bit through her thin cotton jacket, forcing her to bury her hands deep into the worn pockets. She reached the glass doors of the local bank branch, her fingers numb as she pulled out her debit card. The machine beeped. The screen glared back at her with a stark red message indicating an invalid transaction. She pushed the card back into the slot, pressing the worn keypad with trembling fingers to check the balance. The display refreshed, showing a total available balance of exactly $3.17. He took everything. Marcus had executed his threat with surgical precision, leaving no trace of her name on their shared bank accounts. She pulled a crumpled receipt from her pocket, wrapping her fingers around the few damp bills she had saved. Counting them under the harsh neon light, she realized she had exactly $43 to survive. The street was empty. High above the city, the air inside the executive suite smelled of leather and expensive cigars. Marcus tossed a thick stack of finalized bank transfers onto his massive glass desk, leaning back into his ergonomic chair. He tapped a manicured finger against the armrest, staring out at the sprawling metropolis he now fully controlled. He had won. Sarah stood by the door, her cheap gray blazer blending into the shadows of the expansive room. Her eyes darted from Marcus's polished shoes to the corner of his desk, where her own scratched black USB drive rested next to his keyboard. She had used that drive for 7 years to organize his personal expenses and shell companies. He never noticed it. "Cancel my morning meetings for the next 3 days," Marcus ordered, not bothering to look in her direction. He swiped through his phone, a smirk stretching across his face as a message from his young mistress popped up. Sarah nodded once, stepping forward to gather the discarded coffee cups and crumpled papers littering the pristine workspace. She stayed silent. Her fingers brushed against the scratched plastic of the USB drive, feeling the familiar groove along its side. Inside that tiny piece of hardware lay the digital footprints of every offshore account and forged invoice he had ever authorized. She slipped it into her pocket, the cold metal heavy against her thigh as she turned away from his desk. The door clicked shut. Back on the street, Evelyn found a narrow wooden bench beneath the rusted awning of a closed diner. The cardboard in her shoe had completely dissolved, leaving her heel exposed to the biting dampness of the concrete. She unzipped her duffel bag, pulling out a thin, threadbare sweater she had knitted 9 years ago. It offered no warmth. She stared at the $43 in her hand, the paper soft and fragile from years of circulation. This was the exact sum of her worth in his eyes, a calculated insult designed to break her spine. She carefully folded the bills, tucking them deep into the zippered compartment of her bag before staring straight ahead. She did not blink. A city bus roared past, spraying a thick sheet of dirty water onto the curb just inches from her boots. She checked her transit card, the small digital scanner at the station earlier, confirming she had exactly 5 rides left. She would need to stretch those rides across the sprawling city to find a place that would hire her. Tomorrow would be brutal. The night deepened, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and heavy, smog-filled gray. She walked 13 blocks to a 24-hour laundromat, pushing open the glass door to escape the relentless wind. The harsh fluorescent lights hummed above, illuminating a row of battered plastic chairs bolted to the scuffed linoleum floor. She sat down. An older woman slept in the corner, a thin wool blanket pulled tight over her shoulders against the draft. Evelyn kept her posture straight, her chin parallel to the floor, refusing to let her shoulders slump in defeat. She pulled a half-empty bottle of water from her bag, taking a small, measured sip to soothe her dry throat. The water was stale. Her mind cataloged the network of shell corporations Marcus had used to drain their joint accounts over the past 7 months. She remembered the late nights formatting his ledgers, the specific names of the offshore entities he thought she never understood. Her silence during dinner wasn't surrender, but a mental mapping of the battleground he had just forced her onto. She knew his secrets. Across town, Sarah sat at her cramped desk in the dimly lit bullpen outside Marcus's locked office. The screen of her outdated monitor cast a pale blue glow over her tired face and dark under-eye circles. She plugged the scratched black USB drive into the port, the machine whirring loudly as it read the hidden files. The folder popped up. There were exactly 91 hidden spreadsheets buried inside a directory Marcus assumed was strictly for archived marketing drafts. Sarah opened the first file, her eyes scanning the columns of diverted funds and fake vendor payouts he had orchestrated. He had siphoned $7 million into a holding company just 3 weeks before filing the divorce papers. The math was undeniable. Marcus emerged from his office, his heavy wool overcoat draped over his arm as he checked his luxury watch. He walked past Sarah's desk without a glance, tossing a crumpled receipt for a diamond necklace onto her keyboard. "Handle the taxes on that purchase before tomorrow morning," he commanded, his voice echoing in the empty hallway. He walked away. Sarah picked up the receipt, the printed total showing exactly $17,500. She looked at her own frayed sleeves, remembering the 3 denied promotion requests she had submitted over the years. She typed the transaction into the primary ledger, and then carefully copied the exact same entry into her hidden drive. The evidence grew. The heavy glass doors of the corporate lobby slid open, letting in a violent gust of wind and freezing rain. 2 security guards in dark uniforms marched out, their hands hovering near their utility belts as they flanked Evelyn. She walked down the granite steps, with her spine perfectly straight, the frayed canvas duffel bag pressed against her ribs. The rain fell hard. Water seeped instantly through the thin fabric of her coat, flattening the collar against her dark skin. The security guard on her right pointed a thick finger toward the edge of the property line, barking an order over the roar of the storm. Evelyn did not flinch, nor did she speak a single word in response to the public humiliation. She simply kept walking. Inside the climate-controlled lobby, Sarah stood perfectly still behind the marble reception desk. Her fingers gripped the edge of a stack of mail, the sharp paper digging a pale crease into her index finger. She watched the water pool around Evelyn's feet, noticing the way the older woman favored her right leg. The cardboard shoe failed. A dark gray piece of pulp slipped from the heel of Evelyn's boot, washing away into the street gutter. Sarah looked down at her own feet, staring at the scuffed toes of her discount store pumps she had worn for 5 years. The synthetic leather peeled at the edges, exposing the cheap, white fabric underneath the black dye. Marcus paid them nothing. He authorized million-dollar expenditures for exotic cars, while freezing employee wages for 7 consecutive quarters. Sarah shifted her gaze back to the street, watching Evelyn stop at the bus shelter exactly 3 blocks away. The wind whipped Evelyn's hair, but the woman kept her head high, refusing to shrink against the cold concrete pillar. She owned her space. Sarah felt a sudden tightening in her throat as she observed the rigid set of Evelyn's jaw. She recognized that specific silence, the exact physical manifestation of swallowing a scream while powerful men stepped on your neck. It was the same silence Sarah wore every time Marcus threw a stack of revisions at her face at 9 in the evening. The reflection was undeniable. Evelyn was not just a discarded wife, she was the architect of the very foundation Marcus now stood upon. Sarah remembered filing the original incorporation documents 11 years ago, recognizing Evelyn's precise handwriting on the margins of the foundational blueprints. Now that same woman stood shivering under a rusted metal awning with absolutely nothing to her name. Marcus took it all. The lobby guards returned, shaking the water from their dark jackets and laughing about the weather. They walked past Sarah without acknowledging her existence, leaving a trail of muddy footprints across the pristine white marble floor. Sarah slowly released her grip on the mail, the stack of envelopes sliding into a messy pile on the counter. The decision was made. She did not feel sorry for Evelyn, because pity was a luxury reserved for those who were safe from the fire. Instead, Sarah saw her own future standing at that bus stop, discarded and erased after years of silent, bleeding loyalty. If Marcus could forge financial ruin to destroy the woman who built him, a secretary was nothing but a speck of dust. She had to strike. She turned away from the glass window, her cheap shoes squeaking softly against the polished stone as she walked to the elevator. She pressed the button for the 31st floor, the metal doors sliding shut to cut off the noise of the lobby. The mirrored interior of the elevator car reflected her pale, exhausted face and the fraying threads of her collar. Her reflection stared back. She reached into the pocket of her blazer, her fingertips tracing the familiar groove of the scratched black USB drive. It contained the real numbers, the unedited ledgers she had secretly maintained for 11 months just to keep her own sanity intact. Marcus demanded she manipulate the official tax forms, forcing her to hide 13 different streams of illicit revenue. He made her complicit. The elevator chimed, the heavy doors opening to reveal the dark, empty corridor of the executive suite. The only light came from the emergency exit signs, casting a dull red glow over the expensive imported carpets. Sarah walked past Marcus's locked office, the heavy oak door standing as a physical barrier between his lies and the truth. She sat down quickly. Her computer monitor hummed to life, throwing a sharp blue light across the cluttered surface of her cramped desk. She plugged the USB drive into the hidden port at the back of the tower, waiting for the familiar folder icon to appear. Her hands moved over the keyboard with practiced precision, navigating through the labyrinth of corporate servers. The numbers never lied. She opened a new encrypted spreadsheet, titling it with a string of 17 random characters to avoid detection by the IT department. She needed to cross-reference the fake bankruptcy filings Marcus had submitted to the divorce court with the actual offshore deposits. The task would require matching thousands of transactions across 9 different international banking institutions. The audit had begun. Outside the building, the rain finally began to slow, leaving a thick mist hanging over the city streets. Evelyn sat on the damp wooden bench of the bus shelter, her eyes tracking the headlights of the approaching vehicles. She reached into her pocket, pulling out a crumpled piece of paper containing a list of Marcus's oldest shell companies. She smoothed it out. The ink had smudged from the humidity, but she recognized the account numbers she had memorized 7 years ago. Marcus thought she was just a maid, completely unaware that she had photographed his private ledgers while doing his laundry. She knew about the holding company in the Caymans, that on receiving exactly 19% of his monthly profits, he underestimated her completely. The bus pulled up to the curb, its pneumatic brakes hissing loudly as the folding doors swung open. Evelyn stepped onto the rubber mat, sliding her transit card into the scanner and watching the digital counter drop to 4 rides. She walked to the very back of the bus, taking a seat in the corner away from the other damp passengers. The engine roared loudly. She rested her head against the cold vibrating glass, her mind assembling the pieces of the trap she was about to build. She needed access to a public library computer, one that Marcus could not trace back to her IP address. She needed to pull the public tax records for his 3 dummy corporations registered under his mistress's maiden name. The hunt was on. Back on the 31st floor, Sarah cross-checked a massive wire transfer, dated 5 days before Marcus filed the divorce papers. He had moved exactly $8,300,000 out of the primary operational fund. He labeled it as a severe market loss, burying the transaction under a mountain of fabricated vendor invoices. The audacity was staggering. Sarah copied the raw data file, dragging it into the secure folder on her scratched black USB drive. She checked the clock in the corner of her screen, the digital numbers reading exactly 11 minutes past midnight. The cleaning crew would arrive in exactly 47 minutes, meaning she had to finish the download and clear her cache. Time was running out. She typed furiously, her eyes burning from the harsh glare of the monitor as she isolated the final set of bank statements. She heard a sudden click from the end of the hallway, the unmistakable sound of the stairwell door opening. Her heart hammered against her ribs, her breath catching in her throat as she hovered her hand over the keyboard. Footsteps echoed loudly. A security guard walked past the glass partition, his flashlight beam sweeping lazily across the empty cubicles. Sarah ducked beneath her desk, pulling the USB drive from the port and holding her breath in the darkness. The beam of light washed over her chair, resting on her glowing monitor for 3 agonizing seconds before moving away. The guard kept walking. She waited until the heavy stairwell door clicked shut again, the silence of the executive floor returning. She slowly rose from under the desk, her knees popping softly as she reinserted the scratched drive to resume the data extraction. This was not just about Evelyn anymore. This was about tearing down the system that kept women like them invisible. The data transfer completed. Sarah ejected the drive, slipping it deep into the lining of her cheap gray blazer, pressing it against her chest. She shut down the computer, plunging her small corner the bullpen back into complete darkness. She gathered her things, her hands steady as she prepared to leave the fortress of lies Marcus had built. Tomorrow changed everything. The rain outside started again, tapping a chaotic rhythm against the reinforced glass windows of the skyscraper. Sarah walked toward the elevator, her reflection catching in the dark panes, merging her image with the city lights below. She thought about Evelyn, standing in the storm, the stoic expression on her face, refusing to break under the pressure. The image burned deep. For 9 years Sarah had swallowed Marcus's insults, accepting the narrative that she was replaceable and devoid of real value. She watched him hand $1,000 bonuses to the junior executives who spent their afternoons playing golf. She remembered the 13 times she had requested a simple cost of living adjustment, only to be handed a stack of extra filing. The disrespect was calculated. Evelyn's silent departure was the catalyst that finally cracked the thick glass of Sarah's conditioned obedience. Seeing the architect of the company pushed into the gutter proved that loyalty was a fatal liability in Marcus's empire. The USB drive against her ribs felt heavier now, transforming from a simple storage device into a weapon of mass destruction. She held the trigger. The elevator descended rapidly, the floor indicator blinking as she plummeted toward the lobby. She adjusted the collar of her blazer, smoothing down the frayed edges with a deliberate, forceful swipe of her hand. She stepped out of the metal box, walking across the marble floor with a completely different stride. Her fear was gone. The security guards at the front desk barely glanced at her, their attention fixed on a small portable television screen. Sarah pushed through the heavy glass doors, stepping out into the freezing rain without opening her umbrella. The cold water hit her face, washing away the stale air of the corporate suite and waking her senses. The storm felt good. She walked exactly 7 blocks to the subway station, her cheap shoes splashing heavily through the deep puddles. She didn't flinch at the cold, her mind entirely focused on the 27 files sitting in her pocket. She swiped her transit card, the turnstile clicking loudly as she pushed through to the underground platform. The train was coming. Down in the damp, echoing station, Sarah stood at the edge of the yellow line, staring at the dark tunnel. She pulled her phone from her pocket, opening a secure messaging application she had downloaded 3 weeks prior. She typed a single cryptic message containing a string of 11 numbers, a code she knew Evelyn would recognize. She hit send. Across the city, Evelyn sat on the edge of a narrow lumpy mattress in a cheap motel room. The walls were stained, and the single overhead bulb cast a sickly yellow light over her damp clothes. Her cheap prepaid phone vibrated aggressively on the battered wooden nightstand, rattling against the peeling veneer. She picked it up. The screen displayed the encrypted message from an unknown number, but the 11 digits were unmistakably the routing number for Marcus's primary offshore account. Evelyn stared at the glowing screen, her thumb hovering over the keypad as she processed the sudden influx of information. Someone inside the fortress had finally decided to open the gates and hand her the keys. She typed back slowly. Received. She sent the single word, deleting the message thread immediately and removing the battery from the cheap plastic phone. She lay back on the thin mattress, staring at the water stains on the ceiling as the pieces aligned. The battle was no longer a solo mission. She now had a ghost operating inside the machine. The empire would fall. The heavy wooden doors of the municipal public library scraped against the cracked tile floor. Evelyn pushed through the entrance, shaking the cold drizzle from her threadbare cotton coat. The fluorescent lights hummed a low, erratic frequency above the rows of dusty bookshelves. The room was quiet. She walked past the circulation desk, her damp cardboard-lined shoe leaving a faint watermark on the linoleum. A large digital clock on the peeling wall displayed exactly 11 minutes past 9 in the morning. She headed toward the public computing area, her eyes fixed on a row of thick, outdated monitors. She sat down slowly. The librarian handed her a laminated guest pass with the number 17 printed in faded red ink. Evelyn chose a terminal in the far corner, positioning her chair so her back faced the solid brick wall. She placed her frayed canvas duffel bag on the floor, clamping it firmly between her ankles. She sat perfectly still. The bulky computer tower groaned loudly as she pressed the sticky plastic power button. She waited exactly 3 minutes for the obsolete operating system to load the pixelated desktop screen. The mouse wheel grinded against the plastic mat as she clicked the faded icon for the internet browser. The screen flashed white. Evelyn typed the web address for the state business registry, her fingers moving with absolute, mechanical precision. She did not need to search for Marcus's primary holding company because she had drafted its original charter. She remembered sitting at their cheap kitchen table 13 years ago, formatting the legal documents while he slept. The memory lacked warmth. She pulled the crumpled piece of paper from her pocket, smoothing out the damp creases against the desk. The 11-digit routing number sent by the anonymous insider burned a clear path through the corporate fog. She typed the sequence into the search bar of the offshore tax database, waiting for the results. The progress bar stalled. The server finally responded, displaying a labyrinth of subsidiary entities tied to a firm called Apex Horizon Group. Marcus had established this specific shell corporation exactly 7 months after their first major venture capital injection. He always claimed it was a dormant account reserved for international marketing liabilities that never actually materialized. He lied about everything. Evelyn clicked on the public tax filings for the year, scanning the columns of declared operational expenditures. She noticed a recurring monthly transfer of exactly $43,500 to a vendor. The vendor was listed as a consulting firm based out of a residential address in a neighboring state. She recognized the street. It was the exact location of the luxury townhouse Marcus had supposedly rented for his regional sales director. She knew the sales director was actually a 23-year-old graduate student he had hired last spring. Evelyn opened a new tab, running a property record search on the specific address listed in the ledger. The deed appeared instantly. The property belonged to an LLC, registered entirely under the maiden name of Marcus's young mistress. He was using company revenue to pay the mortgage, actively draining their marital assets into a hidden portfolio. She pulled a cheap yellow legal pad from her bag, writing down the transaction dates with a blue pen. She recorded every penny. Her stomach growled, a sharp cramp reminding her she had not eaten anything since the cold chicken yesterday. She reached into her pocket, her fingers brushing against the $43 she had left in the world. She bypassed the vending machine in the lobby, unscrewing the cap of her plastic water bottle instead. The water was lukewarm. She took a slow, measured sip to quiet the hunger, refusing to abandon her post at the computer screen. The library's strict policy allowed guests exactly 45 minutes of internet access before automatically logging them out. She had to maximize every second, cross-referencing the state registry with the offshore routing numbers. Time was slipping away. She opened the third file, digging into the payroll records for a subsidiary named Vanguard Logistics. Marcus had claimed this branch went bankrupt 3 years ago, blaming a sudden shift in international shipping tariffs. Evelyn stared at the screen, tracing a continuous stream of active revenue flowing into the supposedly dead account. He manufactured the crisis. The ledger showed deposits of $9,000 occurring every 5 days without a single interruption. She copied the exact legal name of the receiving bank, noting the overseas branch identifier code in the margin. Her blue pen scratched aggressively against the yellow paper, filling 11 pages with raw, undeniable financial data. Her hand began cramping. A pop-up window appeared in the center of the monitor, warning her that only 3 minutes remained. She quickly navigated to the printing portal, selecting exactly 27 critical pages of the public tax documents. The system prompted her for a payment of 13 cents per page, requiring cash at the main desk. She grabbed her bag. She walked to the printing station, her cardboard-lined shoe slapping softly against the worn tile floor. She handed the librarian a crumpled $5 bill, receiving a handful of dull silver coins in return. The large laser printer hummed to life, spitting out the warm sheets of paper containing Marcus's undoing. She gathered them carefully. Evelyn carried the 27 printed pages back to her isolated table in the far corner of the room. She laid them out in a grid, creating a physical map of the financial labyrinth Marcus had constructed. The lines of black ink connected the domestic shell companies directly to the offshore accounts managed by Apex Horizon. The structure was fragile. She pulled out a faded red marker she had found in the bottom of her canvas bag. She drew thick, heavy circles around the matching routing numbers, linking the fake vendor payments to the mistress. Marcus had built his empire on the assumption that she was entirely too ignorant to understand the math. He made a mistake. She had spent 7 years balancing the books for his first startup while he golfed with potential investors. She understood the intricate mechanisms of capital depreciation better than the expensive accountants he currently kept on retainer. The divorce papers he shoved in her face were based on a tax return that artificially inflated his debts. She found the discrepancy. He claimed a total asset depreciation of $17 million to justify his sudden declaration of personal bankruptcy. However, the printed ledgers from the Vanguard Logistics subsidiary showed a corresponding asset transfer of the exact same amount. He simply moved the money across the border, relabeling the massive funds as a foreign investment loss. It was textbook fraud. Evelyn folded the 27 pages, creasing the edges sharply before sliding them into a thin plastic folder. She packed the folder into her bag, nesting it safely beside her thin sweater and her remaining dollars. The computer's screen clicked black, the session timer officially expiring and locking her out of the municipal network. She pushed back slowly. She walked out of the library, the automatic doors sliding open to reveal a gray, heavily overcast afternoon. The cold wind immediately bit at her face, but she barely registered the sudden drop in temperature. She walked toward the bus stop, her mind calculating the exact sequence of events required for the court hearing. The trap was set. Marcus believed he had severed her completely from the financial resources required to hire a competent legal team. He assumed she would arrive at the courthouse broken, begging for a meager settlement just to secure a meal. He expected a weeping victim, completely unaware that she had weaponized his own arrogance against him. The hunter was waiting. She stood at the bus stop, watching the heavy traffic crawl along the slick, rain-soaked asphalt. She checked the time on the large bank clock across the street, the red digits reading 3 o'clock. She had 19 hours until the preliminary divorce hearing commenced in front of the county judge. She would be ready. The heavy frosted glass door of the executive suite swung open, hitting the rubber wall stop with a sharp thud. Marcus strode out into the dim bullpen, aggressively shrugging his broad shoulders into a tailored Italian wool coat. He tossed a thick leather binder onto the cluttered surface of Sarah's desk, knocking over a plastic cup of cold water. The liquid spilled everywhere. Reconcile these vendor payouts before the morning board meeting, and do not miss a single decimal point, he ordered. He checked the reflection of his perfectly styled hair in the dark monitor screen, entirely ignoring her presence. A heavy cloud of expensive cologne masked the stale air of the cubicle as he adjusted his silk tie. He checked his watch. "I have a dinner reservation in exactly 47 minutes at the steakhouse downtown," he declared to the empty hallway. He pulled a sleek smartphone from his pocket, typing a rapid message to the 23-year-old mistress waiting for him. He tossed a wrinkled receipt for a $3,500 diamond bracelet onto the soaking paperwork. He walked away fast. The elevator dinged softly, swallowing his imposing figure and leaving the 31st floor in complete oppressive silence. Sarah picked up the damp receipt, tracing the faded blue ink with her calloused index finger. She looked at the fraying cuff of her cheap gray blazer, bought on clearance 7 years ago. The fabric felt thin. She pulled a stack of brown paper napkins from her bottom drawer, meticulously wiping the spilled water from the leather binder. She reached into her pocket, pulling out the scratched black USB drive she had carried for exactly 11 months. She plugged the metal connector into the hidden port at the back of her bulky desktop tower. The machine whirred loudly. The digital clock in the corner of her monitor displayed exactly 7 minutes past 5 in the evening. She opened the primary corporate server, typing her administrative password to access the restricted financial directories. Marcus arrogantly assumed she lacked the fundamental intelligence to understand the complex network of offshore holding companies. He made a mistake. She navigated through a labyrinth of 13 nested folders, searching for the specific quarterly reports he had demanded she edit. She found a hidden spreadsheet labeled with a string of 17 random alphanumeric characters. She clicked the file, watching a massive grid of illicit transactions populate the harsh, bright screen. The numbers were massive. He had systematically drained exactly $11,371,000 from the employee pension fund. He masked the massive withdrawal as a severe operational loss related to a fictional supply chain crisis in Asia. She dragged the raw data file directly into the secure folder located on her scratched USB drive. The transfer bar loaded. The harsh blue light of the monitor burned her eyes, forcing her to blink away the dry, stinging sensation. Her lower back ached with a dull, continuous throb from sitting in the rigid plastic chair for 9 consecutive hours. She ignored the physical pain, keeping her hands positioned squarely over the plastic keys of her cheap keyboard. She kept typing furiously. She opened the leather binder Marcus had carelessly thrown at her, flipping past the first 5 pages of legitimate invoices. Hidden near the back, she found exactly 19 purchase orders billed to a logistics company that did not actually exist. The listed address matched the exact location of a vacant parking lot located 33 miles outside the city limits. It was completely fake. She documented the forged purchase orders, cross-referencing the vendor identification codes with the state tax registry. She found a direct link tying the fake company to a shell account registered under his young mistress's maiden name. She saved exactly 89 pages of undeniable proof, compressing the files to fit onto her portable drive. The evidence piled up. The heavy stairwell door clicked, sending a sharp echo vibrating down the length of the empty corporate corridor. Sarah instantly minimized the glowing spreadsheet, plunging the screen back to a standard, boring internal email draft. She held her breath, her chest tightening as the heavy footsteps of the night security guard approached her desk. She did not move. The guard shined his heavy tactical flashlight through the glass partition, the beam sweeping across her cluttered desk surface. "You are working late again, Sarah," he noted, his voice flat and devoid of any real curiosity. She simply nodded, gesturing toward the thick leather binder resting under the harsh glare of her desk lamp. The guard kept walking. She waited until his heavy boots faded into the distance before maximizing the restricted server window once again. The digital clock now read exactly 9 minutes past 11 at night, leaving her with extremely limited time. She selected the final batch of 27 PDF documents containing Marcus's forged signature on the bankruptcy filings. The download finished quickly. She stared at the final document, an official court petition demanding Evelyn vacate the penthouse within 17 days. Marcus had attached a falsified bank statement showing a negative balance of exactly $531. Sarah knew the actual account held exactly $9,743,000 in liquid assets. He was stealing everything. She thought about Evelyn standing in the freezing rain, her worn canvas bag clutched tightly against her ribs. She remembered the way Marcus had mocked his wife's intelligence to the junior executives just 3 days ago. He built his entire fortune on the blueprints Evelyn drafted, and now he was erasing her from the narrative. The injustice was absolute. Sarah extracted exactly 71 emails proving Marcus had explicitly directed the accounting department to shred physical tax receipts. The process required her to bypass a secondary firewall he had installed exactly 5 months prior to the divorce filing. She copied the IP address of the offshore server, pasting it directly into a blank text document. The puzzle was complete. Sarah clicked the eject button on the screen, waiting for the system prompt to safely remove the hardware. She pulled the scratched black USB drive from the port, the metal casing warm against her cold fingertips. She dropped it into the front pocket of her gray blazer, burying it under a crumpled tissue for safety. She grabbed her coat. She organized the leather binder precisely the way Marcus had left it, aligning the edges with the desk corner. She placed the receipt for the diamond bracelet exactly in the center of the wet water ring on the wood. She shut down the computer, the sudden darkness swallowing the small cubicle and erasing her digital footprint entirely. She stood up slowly. She walked down the long corridor, her scuffed shoes sinking silently into the thick, expensive imported carpet. She bypassed the elevator, pushing open the heavy metal door to the emergency stairwell to avoid the lobby cameras. She descended exactly 31 flights of concrete stairs, the rhythmic echo of her footsteps bouncing off the cinderblock walls. The air grew colder. She pushed through the ground floor exit, stepping out into the dark, damp alley behind the towering glass skyscraper. The city streetlights flickered against the wet pavement, illuminating the heavy fog rolling off the nearby industrial harbor. She pulled the collar of her cheap coat tightly around her neck, blocking the bitter wind blowing off the water. She checked her phone. The screen displayed exactly 3 unread messages from the automated billing system regarding her overdue electric bill. She dismissed the notifications, opening the encrypted messaging application she had used to contact Evelyn earlier that day. The single word received sat at the bottom of the screen, a quiet confirmation of their silent partnership. The evidence was secured. The neon sign of the corner diner flickered, buzzing violently against the damp brick wall. Evelyn sat in the farthest booth, her frayed canvas bag resting heavily on her lap. She stared at the scratched Formica tabletop, her dark eyes tracking the slow drip of condensation falling from a water pipe above. The diner was empty. The glass door groaned on its rusted hinges, letting in a sharp gust of freezing wind from the street. Sarah walked inside, shaking the heavy rain from her cheap gray blazer before scanning the dim room. She spotted Evelyn in the corner, her worn cotton coat pulling tightly across her shoulders. She walked over slowly. Neither woman offered a greeting, establishing the gravity of the situation with absolute, calculated silence. Sarah slid into the cracked vinyl booth opposite Evelyn, placing a damp manila envelope on the sticky table. She pulled her hands back, resting her cold fingers against the edge of the cheap wood. The envelope sat untouched. Evelyn reached out, untying the thin red string securing the flap of the heavy paper envelope. She pulled out exactly 27 pages of dense financial spreadsheets Sarah had extracted from the restricted server. The fluorescent light above flickered, casting harsh shadows across the complex columns of illicit transactions. She read the numbers. Evelyn pulled a yellow legal pad from her bag, flattening exactly 11 pages of handwritten notes beside the printed ledgers. She pointed to a specific transaction routed through a dummy corporation registered in the Cayman Islands. He moved exactly 17% of our total liquid assets through this specific channel last week, Evelyn stated. Sarah verified the numbers. That entity is registered entirely under the maiden name of his new mistress, Sarah confirmed, her voice completely steady. He authorized a continuous monthly payout of exactly $9,000, labeling it as a vague consulting fee. Evelyn stared at the printed confirmation of her husband's ultimate betrayal, her jaw clenching tight. She did not flinch. Sarah reached into her pocket, pulling out the scratched black USB drive she had carried for 11 months. She placed the small piece of metal directly on top of the printed spreadsheets, pushing it toward the center of the table. This holds the raw data for exactly 13 shell companies, Sarah stated, her tone strictly professional. Evelyn took the drive. The digital files contained the definitive proof required to trigger an immediate federal audit of his entire holding company. If Marcus presented his forged bankruptcy forms to a sitting judge, he would instantly commit perjury. The combination of Sarah's internal access and Evelyn's foundational knowledge created a perfectly inescapable snare. He built his cage. Evelyn's slipped the drive into the deep, zippered pocket of her faded coat. She did not express gratitude, acknowledging that this transaction was built on mutual survival rather than friendship. Marcus had crushed them both under his expensive leather shoes, relying on their assumed weakness to build his empire. His arrogance blinded him. The hearing is scheduled for exactly 9 o'clock on Tuesday morning, Evelyn stated, her eyes locked onto Sarah's pale face. He plans to submit the forged bankruptcy declaration within the first 17 minutes of the session. Sarah nodded, tracing a water stain on the table with her thumbnail as she absorbed the timeline. The trap was set. His lead attorney will attempt to block any sudden influx of new financial evidence. Evelyn analyzed, staring at the scarred table. They will argue that the internal audits were obtained illegally, dismissing the documents as disgruntled fabrications. Sarah leaned forward slightly, her pale hands resting completely still on the sticky vinyl surface. She held the countermeasure. I am listed as the official administrative proxy on exactly 33 of his primary bank accounts, Sarah explained clearly. I have the legal authority to request comprehensive historical ledgers for all corporate entities under his umbrella. Evelyn registered the strategic advantage, recognizing the exact loophole Marcus had lazily created to avoid basic paperwork. His laziness was fatal. The presiding judge requires physical verification of all digital evidence submitted during an active dispute, Sarah continued quietly. I need to physically present the unedited ledgers to the court auditor before Marcus finalizes his sworn testimony. Evelyn picked up her lukewarm cup of black coffee, taking a slow sip without breaking eye contact. The timing was critical. The harsh fluorescent lights buzzed aggressively overhead, casting deep, exhausted shadows under the eyes of both women. Evelyn's cardboard-lined shoe rested flat against the dirty tile, a constant reminder of the $43 separating her from starvation. Sarah pulled a frayed thread from her blazer cuff, calculating the professional suicide she was about to commit. Neither woman blinked. They sat in the dim diner for exactly 47 minutes, mapping out the precise sequence of the upcoming hearing. They did not discuss what they would do after the verdict, focusing entirely on the destruction of his lies. The waitress approached the table, dropping a faded green receipt containing a total of $3.17. Sarah paid the bill. They stood up simultaneously, gathering their respective burdens before stepping away from the scratched booth. Evelyn adjusted the heavy strap of her canvas duffel bag, the frayed edges pressing against her collarbone. Sarah buttoned her thin gray blazer, bracing herself for the cold wind waiting beyond the glass door. They walked outside together. The rain had completely stopped, leaving the city streets slick and reflective under the amber streetlights. Evelyn turned toward the bus stop located exactly 7 blocks down the deserted avenue. Sarah headed toward the subway station, her cheap shoes squishing softly against the damp concrete sidewalk. They did not look back. Marcus was likely sleeping in his custom king bed, convinced his $11 million theft was entirely untraceable. He assumed Evelyn was crying in a cheap motel, completely paralyzed by the sudden destruction of her life. He viewed Sarah as a mindless piece of office equipment, completely incapable of independent, aggressive thought. His superiority was fragile. Tomorrow, he would walk into that courtroom expecting to permanently discard his wife without surrendering a single dollar. He anticipated a quick, painless victory orchestrated by his expensive corporate lawyers and his manufactured debt. He completely underestimated the lethality of a woman who had absolutely nothing left to lose. The reckoning was imminent. The heavy oak doors of courtroom number 17 swung open with a resounding thud. Marcus strode down the center aisle, adjusting the cuffs of his $3,000 bespoke suit. His Italian leather shoes clicked sharply against the polished hardwood floor, projecting an aura of absolute control. He sat down. Next to him, his lead attorney arranged a thick stack of manila folders on the defense table. Exactly 3 rows behind them, his 23-year-old mistress and a group of junior executives sat together. They witnessed his psychological abuse but chose complete silence, their cowardice filling the gallery. The bystanders watched. Evelyn sat alone at the plaintiff's table, her posture rigid and perfectly straight against the wooden chair. She wore the same faded cotton coat, the frayed edges contrasting starkly with the polished mahogany furniture. She kept her hands folded over the heavy canvas duffel bag resting on her lap. She did not blink. The presiding judge flipped through the preliminary filings, peering down at Marcus over the rim of his reading glasses. Mr. Vance, you claim your holding company has suffered catastrophic losses over the last 7 fiscal quarters, the judge stated. Marcus stood up slowly, buttoning his suit jacket before addressing the high bench with practiced confidence. He spoke without hesitation. Your Honor, the international supply chain collapse destroyed exactly 89% of our operational revenue, Marcus declared. He signaled his attorney, who immediately handed a thick, bound document to the bailiff for official submission. I have submitted the finalized tax ledgers proving my holding company is currently $11 million in debt. He sealed his fate, Marcus turned his head, casting a cold, calculating gaze toward the isolated table where his wife sat. My estranged wife is attempting to extract wealth that simply does not exist anymore, he stated loudly. He pointed a manicured finger at Evelyn, ensuring the entire gallery witnessed his carefully constructed narrative. The insult hung heavy. The junior executives in the gallery averted their eyes, choosing to protect their jobs rather than defend a woman's dignity. The expensive defense attorney adjusted his silk tie, completely unbothered by the blatant destruction of a human life. Evelyn stared directly at the judge, ignoring the heavy weight of their collective silence pressing down on her shoulders. She remained absolutely still. She contributed absolutely nothing to the structural growth of my enterprises during our 13 years of marriage, Marcus continued. She functioned as a dependent, draining my personal accounts while offering zero strategic value to the corporate board. He placed his hands flat on the defense table, leaning forward to emphasize his absolute authority. His trap closed. I request the court grant the divorce immediately and dismiss all claims for alimony or asset division. The judge looked down at the forged documents, his pen hovering over the signature line of the preliminary assessment. Marcus smiled tightly, believing he had successfully buried Evelyn beneath a mountain of fabricated legal paperwork. The gavel waited. Are you stating under penalty of perjury that these financial records represent your total marital assets? The judge asked. Marcus maintained his steady eye contact with the bench, his posture radiating complete and utter certainty. I swear on my life that these 71 pages contain every single dollar attached to my name. The perjury was recorded. The heavy silence in the courtroom magnified the ticking of the large analog clock mounted on the back wall. Evelyn traced the frayed edge of her canvas bag, her fingertips brushing against the hidden zipper compartment. Inside that thin pocket rested the exact mathematical countermeasure designed to obliterate his entire existence. The lock clicked shut. Marcus sat back down, pulling a silver pen from his breast pocket to sign the final declaration of bankruptcy. His attorney slid a secondary document forward, demanding Evelyn forfeit her rights to the penthouse within 5 days. The mistress in the third row pulled out her phone, drafting a celebratory message to her wealthy friends. They moved too fast. The judge stamped the first page of the defense's financial disclosure, the heavy red ink bleeding into the white paper. Unless the plaintiff has physical evidence contradicting these ledgers, I am forced to accept this declaration of insolvency. Marcus turned to Evelyn, his face contorting into a mask of pure, unadulterated contempt and victory. He exhaled loudly. Evelyn did not lower her eyes, refusing to grant him the physical submission he desperately craved. She knew his entire defense relied on the assumption that she lacked the resources to audit his offshore accounts. She waited for the exact moment his perjury became an undeniable matter of public record. The door opened loudly. The heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom slammed open, rattling the solid brass hinges against the wood. Sarah walked down the center aisle, her scuffed discount shoes echoing sharply against the polished marble floor. She wore the exact same cheap gray blazer with the frayed cuffs she had worn for 7 years. The room went completely silent. Marcus jerked his head around, his manicured fingers tightening around the edge of the defense table until his knuckles turned white. His expensive defense attorney stopped shuffling his manila folders, staring blankly at the unexpected interruption in their meticulously orchestrated victory. The 23-year-old mistress in the third row dropped her phone onto her lap. Sarah did not stop. She walked past the gallery of whispering junior executives, entirely ignoring the heavy stares of the men who had mocked her. She stopped directly in front of the wooden gate separating the gallery from the trial floor, standing tall. Your Honor, I am the executive administrative proxy for Vanguard Logistics and Apex Horizon Group, she stated clearly. She pushed the gate open. The judge lowered his pen, pushing his reading glasses up the bridge of his nose as he evaluated the intruder. You are interrupting an active proceeding, young lady, and you have exactly 3 seconds to explain yourself, he warned. Sarah reached into the pocket of her blazer, pulling out a thick stack of folded papers and a scratched black USB drive. She stepped toward the bench. The defense has submitted exactly 71 pages of forged financial declarations under the penalty of perjury, Sarah declared. She placed the worn USB drive and the printed spreadsheets onto the polished wood of the court clerk's desk. This drive contains the unedited original ledgers exported directly from his private terminal at exactly 11 minutes past midnight. The metal drive gleamed, Marcus shot out of his chair, knocking his heavy wooden seat backward onto the floor with a loud crash. She is a disgruntled secretary attempting to sabotage my legal proceedings with stolen, manipulated files. He shouted aggressively. The judge slammed his wooden gavel against the sound block exactly 3 times to kill the noise. The bailiff stepped forward. "Sit down immediately, Mr. Vance, or you will spend the next 47 hours in a holding cell," the judge ordered. He gestured to the court-appointed forensic accountant sitting at the side terminal near the jury box. "Plug that drive in and cross-reference the routing numbers with the defense's bankruptcy declaration immediately," the judge commanded. The accountant took the drive. The courtroom held its collective breath as the accountant inserted the scratched black plastic into the port of the government computer. The projector screen mounted on the wall flickered to life, illuminating the dim room with a harsh white light. The spreadsheet loaded, displaying a massive grid of 89 rows of hidden transactions. The numbers were massive. The accountant scrolled through the columns, tracing a direct line from the allegedly bankrupt holding company to an offshore account. "Your Honor, this hidden ledger shows a sequence of exactly 13 wire transfers executed over the last 5 months, the expert stated. He highlighted a block of cells, blowing up the font size so the entire gallery could read the data. Marcus stopped breathing. The defendant did not lose his operational revenue to a supply chain collapse, as claimed in his sworn testimony. The accountant adjusted his microphone, his voice echoing cleanly off the high wooden ceiling of the courtroom. He systematically moved exactly $18,591,000 into a Cayman entity. The room remained perfectly still. Sarah stood her ground, her spine rigid as she looked directly at the man who had exploited her for 11 years. She did not gloat, nor did she smile at the sudden and total collapse of his carefully built empire. She had simply delivered the final piece of the trap directly to the executioner. The truth was absolute. Evelyn watched the projection screen from the plaintiff's table, her dark eyes scanning the confirmed offshore account routing numbers. The frayed canvas duffel bag on her lap felt lighter, the burden of his manufactured poverty finally lifting off her shoulders. She turned her head slowly, locking her gaze onto her husband's pale, sweating face. He had absolutely nothing. The judge stared at the projected spreadsheet, his wooden gavel resting heavily in his right hand. He looked down at the defense table where Marcus sat paralyzed, the expensive suit, suddenly looking like a cheap costume. "The court invalidates your fraudulent bankruptcy declaration and immediately freezes all 17 of your offshore accounts," he declared. The gavel fell. Sarah stepped back from the podium, her scuffed shoes silent against the polished marble floor. The forensic accountant highlighted the final cell on the screen, revealing the exact total of stolen marital assets. The bright red font displayed exactly $18,591,000 in diverted funds. Marcus lost everything. "Due to the blatant perjury and severe financial manipulation, I am awarding the plaintiff full control of the Vanguard Logistics portfolio," the judge finalized. He signed the heavy stack of official decrees, systematically stripping Marcus of the empire he had stolen from his wife. The 23-year-old mistress in the third row stood up and quickly walked out of the courtroom. The gallery watched. Marcus turned his head slowly, his hollow eyes staring at the woman he had tried to erase. Evelyn sat perfectly upright in her wooden chair, the frayed strap of her canvas bag resting on her shoulder. She showed absolutely no emotion toward his complete destruction, refusing to grant him the comfort of her anger. She held his gaze. She did not gloat over the recovered fortune, nor did she raise her voice to celebrate the victory. She simply looked at the broken man sitting across the aisle, confirming his total legal and financial defeat. The silence stretched for exactly 7 agonizing seconds before she finally broke the absolute stillness of the room. "Done." The bronze plaque mounted on the heavy brick wall of the new women's shelter gleamed under the afternoon sun. I watched the workmen polish the engraved letters of the Evelyn Vance Foundation, funded by exactly $17 million in recovered assets. A young mother walked through the heavy glass doors, holding her worn canvas bag and stepping out of the freezing rain. The cycle was broken. They always assume that silence is a symptom of weakness or a complete surrender to the crushing weight of their power. I spent 11 years building an empire in the shadows, letting a fragile man believe he was the sole architect of the towering skyscraper. When you strip a woman of her resources and push her into the gutter with exactly $43, you do not create a victim. You forge a weapon. If you possessed the absolute power to financially destroy the person who abused you, would you take everything they own or simply walk away?